name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord, we thank you for your grace upon us. We thank you for this day, and we ask for you to be with us as we continue to explore the world that Jesus knew in this tumultuous time. We ask this, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, what I thought I would do is do kind of this Hasmonean period's complicated. And so Maccabean revolt is. You have so many characters. I'm going to kind of just sum that up for you, and then we'll finish it with Queen Alexandra. That shouldn't take long, and then we are going to go into Herod Antipater. Who was he? And then Herod the Great. And Herod Antipater is going to be very, very important because one of the things Israel won was the right to not have to worship the Roman gods, to worship their God alone. But let's do a quick overview of this of what we've been talking about. Summary. We talked about the Maccabean revolt, of course, that was 167 to 160 BC. And that was, as we went over, it was a response to these really oppressive policies of Antiochus IV, the Seleucid king, because he wanted to Hellenize the Jewish population, wanted everybody to be Greek, after Alexander the Great. And he banned Jewish religious practices, and you remember he desecrated the temple by dedicating it to Zeus. Well, that led to a revolt, of course, that began with Judas Maccabeus and his family. Their descendants would become known as the Hasmoneans. They managed to reclaim Jerusalem, and they rededicated the temple in 164. And that's where we get this, that's where Hanukkah comes from, this rededicating of this temple. And they established, well, over time, what happened is they established a theocratic state, which was still under some Seleucid oversight, but it became increasingly autonomous because they just could not they couldn't beat the Maccabeans. And in the Seleucid kingdom based in Antioch, well, you had these fights emerge over who was going to be on the throne after Antiochus IV and Jonathan Maccabeus. Well, he played both sides, keep the Seleucids fighting each other, which would weaken them. And then finally, Simon Maccabeus, he finally won a secure formal independence for the Jewish people in 142 BC. And that is the beginning of what is called the Hasmonean dynasty, Hasmonean period. Okay, and he assumed the title of high priest, military leader, ethnarch, and he combined religious and political authority. And it's not how the Jewish people saw things. King was king, the high priest was spiritual authority. But they managed to put them together. And of course, big part of the problem, and one of the things the Lord does, is put the kingdom back under the house of King David. Okay. And then under John Hyrcanus, his successors, one of the things they did do, these Hasmoneans, they did manage to expand the territory to include really the whole of ancient Israel in the Old Testament. They really kind of reclaimed the whole Holy Land as they had always known it. So they weren't complete disasters. They managed to do that, which was, of course, no small achievement. Idumea, which will become an important place. That's If you look at Israel today, that's the southern part of Israel. Samaria, which had been part of the just north of Judea, and other parts as well. And so they had pretty much they did retain it, uh, did get back, and really brought it back to the ancient kingdom of David and Solomon, in terms of the land they had. And when they went into Idumea, Asmoneans, they came and they told the people there, you have to convert or leave. And that led to forced conversions. Those will be seen as not valid. If you're going to convert to the Jewish faith, just as if you convert to the Catholic faith, you have to do that freely. It cannot be a forced conversion. That becomes an issue later. Okay. And we got up to the end of it. We were talking about Alexander Jannaeus. Yeah, he's really the last of them. He was the third son of John Jannaeus the first, and he assumed the throne after his brother Aristobulus the first. He was very, very big on military expansion, and a lot of internal strife came up around him. He wanted to expand the kingdom even further, and he went even further north and surrounding Hellenistic cities. He was successful doing that. His reign, however, was marked by a big internal strife. Jannaeus aligned himself with the Sadducees, a priestly sect that, they're the ones who adherents to the first 5 books of the Bible, and they were willing to cooperate with Hellenistic culture. Well, that alienated the Pharisees, and finally there was a big breach between Jannaeus and the Pharisees when, at the Feast of Tabernacles, he publicly mocked the Pharisees. Well, that incited a rebellion, and you ended up with a civil war. And that actually lasted quite a while. It was 6 years long between those who supported the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And the Sadducees took care of the temple. The Pharisees took care of the synagogues. Okay, go to a synagogue today. You have the rabbi, descendants of the Pharisees. You don't have the temple anymore. You had these people who initially began during the Babylonian exile, because that's when they started the synagogue. And then the Pharisees, huge part of the Maccabean revolt. And then this Jannaeus comes along, and a huge conflict, and he ended up crucifying 800 of the Pharisees. Yeah, created a mess. And as I mentioned very last time, something very, very strange happened, and not really a very good answer for it. Jannaeus, on his deathbed, told his wife, give the kingdom back over to the Pharisees. God's grace, just an insight that there will be no peace in Israel unless we bring the Pharisees back into this and put them back in power. And so his wife, Salome Alexandra, female queen, yes, assumed the throne after his death. And her reign is a very stark contrast to her husband, because during this, she worked very, very hard at getting peace among all the different Jewish groups, getting the place stabilized, and she greatly, greatly empowered the Pharisees. That's why in the New Testament, who really has the power? Primarily, it's the Pharisees. the Sadducees, that aristocratic class, is a much smaller group. Pharisees were well respected by the people, and they're the teachers, and they are party of the people, and they're the ones teaching in the synagogues, and they were the ones promoted this group of people, 70, called the Sanhedrin, which slowly emerged during this time as well. And it is under her rule. You know, the Lord is always talking about, the Pharisees and their laws. Well, it is precisely under her that the laws of the Pharisees, which was the Mosaic covenant, and their interpretation of it and their implementation of it, which was, of course, you've heard all of the Lord's criticism of it. It was all show and nothing really about a change of heart, which comes about at the time of Christ. Pharisees really, once they got into power, they really liked their power. And she pointed a man named Simon ben Shaitop, a leading Pharisee, to the high positions of authority, who helped her restore harmony between the ruling elite and the populace. And her reign is kind of a golden age, really, for Pharisaic Judaism. However, these problems didn't entirely disappear. Her reliance on the Pharisees did somewhat alienate the Sadducees and the military elite. And upon her death, well, things become a mess. She has two sons. Her two sons, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. Both of them were very ambitious. They were both militarily skilled, and they both wanted the throne and the priesthood. After this great reign of this Alexandra, Queen Alexandra, back to more turmoil, back to more chaos, and back to more civil war. Initially, Aristobulus II defeated Hyrcanus, forcing him to abdicate. However, Hyrcanus II found an ally in a man named Herod Antipater, Idumea. The father of Herod the Great is a powerful man, Idumea, and Hyrcanus found an ally in him. And Herod Antipater was a very, very shrewd political operator. And what he does, and we'll talk about him real shortly, it's the whole reason you end up with the Herodian dynasty. And Herod Antipater encouraged Hyrcanus to seek assistance from Nabateans and later from the rising power of Rome. Well, the struggle kept going on and on. And finally, the Roman Senate, they're looking at this. And we have a problem. We have a very unstable eastern border. Just east of Israel are the Persians, who are becoming a very strong military power all again. And they are a huge threat to the eastern boundary of the Roman Empire. And they would be for a very, very long time. Roman Senate's looking at this, and they send a general, their very best general, one of the greatest generals of all time, a guy named Pompey the Great. Well, Pompey, given orders, Israel becomes a Roman province. They had won their independence under the Maccabees, but they could not, all of the succession stuff, they could not govern themselves. Roman Senate, Rome's not an empire yet. This is time of the Roman Republic. We're getting right to the point where Julius Caesar comes along and we get the civil wars. But Pompey goes there and he captures Jerusalem and he puts Hyrcanus II as high priest and the local ruler of that area, puts him in what they call, Romans call an ethnarch. That is, you're my puppet. You're my ruler here, and we're keeping a very close eye on you, and you will do what we want. Aristobulus was taken as a prisoner, and Pompey took him and his family back to Rome and had this great, what is called a tribute. He was taken back to Rome in chains and marched through the streets of the city of Rome with Pompey the Great with his hand on the chain. It was a celebration of Pompey's military campaign and bringing Israel, Judea, which was now the size of ancient Israel, into the Roman Empire. After all of this, Israel is now a client state of the Romans. Okay. Something to understand what's going on right here in this period. I just mentioned Herod Antipater. He, powerful local ruler in Idumea, and he's got plans for Israel. And he wants a stable Israel. He wants an end. He picked sides. And that was in 64 BC. Pompey the Great's a young man. Well, the Roman, I can't go into why. It had a great deal to do with land disputes and disputes over land and how land is distributed in the Roman Empire. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer in the Roman Republic. It's coming apart. Julius Caesar comes along. Well, you know the story of Julius Caesar. He becomes an extremely powerful general. He raised huge armies of his own, incredibly successful, scaring the crap out of the Senate. Senate tells Julius Caesar, you will give up your armies. Caesar's not doing that. He would be up against so many charges, it'd be crazy. And he wants to reform. Julius Caesar did not want to get rid of the Roman Republic. He wanted to reform it, basically through land reform. He heads into Rome, crosses the Rubicon, and makes himself dictator for life. A dictator in Roman world lasted for a year. A dictator is someone the Roman Senate gives power to solve problems that it would take too long for the Senate to do. Here in the United States, when the United States is at war, we give war powers to the president because we can't have month-long debates about what we're going to do here. We got to move now. And it was an office that lasted for a year. Caesar said, "No, dictator for life." Things split. Pompey is on the side of the Senate and the upper classes. Caesar's on the side of the people. Civil war breaks out in the Republic. It, of course, ends but with uh, Augustus, nephew of Julius Caesar, becoming. They didn't use the word emperor, but principate, which means the highest among equals. Okay, Caesar and Pompey are in a huge fight. Okay, and Caesar's armies are campaigning in Egypt, and he's sieging the city of Alexandria. Um, he wants Egypt on his side, so he's sieging the city of Alexandria there in Egypt. But he ends up in a very, very serious and difficult problem. Pompey is there fighting, and he is with Pompey the Great there's fighting, and the Ptolemies, Cleopatra the seventh, and her brother Ptolemy the eighth, got this huge fight going on. Caesar is running out of supplies. Caesar, Pompey's army, Caesar has surrounded Alexandria. Pompey's army, they're all around the walls of Alexandria. Pompey's army is coming all around Julius Caesar's army. They're trapped between Julius Caesar's army and the walls of Alexandria. And the people in Alexandria put up a heck of a fight. Caesar is in very, very big trouble. Okay. So what happens? Well, Herod Antipater, governor of Judea now, well, he is watching this whole thing. He's watching this whole thing. One of the things you had to be really, really careful in doing in the ancient world, one, you had to pick a side, and two, you better pick the right side, because if not, you're dead later. Herod Antipater was really, really good at picking the right side. He aligns himself, Julius Caesar, organized an army with all kinds of support, supplies, soldiers. Many Jewish went with him, and basically rescues Julius Caesar's army. Herod Antipater rescues Julius Caesar's army. Julius Caesar eventually defeats Pompey later on in the Civil War. But because of that help, Herod Antipater and his descendants be the kings of Israel. And Julius Caesar did something else that just doesn't happen. But it did. Herod Antipater asked Julius Caesar, okay, Israel is now part of the Roman Empire. I'm sure they had a discussion. They're not going to worship the Roman gods. You don't want them to do that. They have their God. God is God of their land, just as the Roman gods are the gods of the Roman territories. Julius Caesar said, okay, the Jews have a complete freedom of religion. They're different. I mean, the Romans saw them as very, very kind of, you got people are strange. You only have one God, but God of their land, and they got a temple for the god. So it looks an awful lot like the rest of the pagan world. But because of Herod Antipater helped bailing out Julius Caesar, Julius Caesar said, yes, people of Israel can worship in your temple. We're not going to interfere with your religion. Okay. And this alliance would grow. There was military assistance, an agreement on military assistance There was an agreement on diplomatic support between the two. And so now you have this huge change. Israel is now part of the Roman Empire, but they can now have freedom of religion. Okay. Herod Antipater's son is who we're going to talk about next. He is called Herod the Great. Why is he called Herod the Great? Because he was one of the most amazing and intelligent men in the ancient world. He was an incredible builder. He's probably the greatest architect of all time. Okay. Oh, so now this war, of course, Julius Caesar is assassinated, and Julius Caesar's will puts Augustus Caesar, his nephew, as his rightful descendant. That blew everybody's mind because Augustus Caesar was pretty much a nobody. He was not known as a very smart military man. And everybody was expecting one of his generals, Mark Antony in particular, to be the one that would succeed Julius Caesar. Okay, you get civil war within Rome between Augustus, who's been given the crown, we could say, and Mark Antony. And all read the play Julius Caesar. You know, Mark Antony spends too much time with Cleopatra, which costs him the war. Caesar Augustus, this is a period of over 40 years of civil warfare. And it was brutal warfare from the time of Julius Caesar to Caesar Augustus, finally defeating Mark Antony. Caesar Augustus goes to the temple of Jupiter, right there in the Forum in Rome. It's right next to the Colosseum. And he closes the doors. Peace has come to Rome. Caesar Augustus is very, very smart. I can't come in here as some kind of dictator, some kind of king in a Roman republic. It's been a republic for over 1,000 years, because if there was one thing the Romans hated, it was a king. So he called himself Principate. Essentially means the highest citizen who is a servant of the rest. Doesn't last long. Well, the rest of Roman history is conflict between emperors and the Senate. But he worked with the Senate. He becomes extremely popular. One of the brilliant things he did is he knew what he could do and didn't do. What he did was find himself a really good general. And that's how he beat Mark Antony. And there's peace, and the Senate loved this peace. He brought in a lot of reforms, and he worked with the Senate. So now, for all practical purposes, the Roman Republic is over, largely over land disputes, by the way. And now you have this one Caesar Augustus. Okay. Well, moving ahead now that we have Caesar Augustus in power. Well, like all empires, we now have an empire. Rome needed money, so Emperor Augustus issued a decree. I, Caesar, the exalted one, orders a census. Let it be known that every person in the empire must register in the town of their birth. The order was sent out immediately to all of the provinces. one of the very first things, the census was about more than just raising money. Caesar Augustus wanted to know, what is the extent of this empire? Who is in this empire? What is the wealth of this empire? After 40 years of civil war, the empire, what is this new thing that we call an empire? They didn't call it that. And so he orders a census. People have really debated whether that census really happened. Well, in Turkey, they found a stela, a large stone, describing the census that Caesar Augustus put out. So there was indeed a census. Okay. And you know the story, Joseph the carpenter was working in his shop, and whoa, those Romans, he muttered. They want money, taxes, more and more taxes. Well, Joseph went home and told his wife, but the child is due at any time. Mary would give birth at home. Must it be in Bethlehem? Yeah, going to be in Bethlehem because this new man in charge of everything, who was a very great leader. He was not a bloodthirsty kind of man at all. And he turned out, I mean, everybody was just mystified. He was always seen as this weak guy. Certainly no one knew anything about the military and all of that. And he starts rebuilding Rome as far as it extended. First thing he does, give out that census. And that is why Joseph and Mary had to go to Bethlehem. He wanted to know, how many different groups of people do I have? Where are they from? What languages do they? On and on. Well, that, of course, that was a 3-day journey, but because of Mary's condition, it took 5. And of course, you know the story of, and the prophet Micah, when she who is to give birth, prophet Micah actually says it's in the city of Bethlehem. Look it up, Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Okay. Well, God was certainly in control. Okay. Now I want to go back to Herod Antipater a bit. He's someone you kind of have to know. Again, he started out as the governor of Idumea, Edom, as it was called in the Old Testament, and with Hyrcanus being defeated and fleeing, well, here's a chance to extend my power. But he needs Rome's support to do it. And we went through how he saw an opportunity, and that was, of course, saving Julius Caesar's army. Fortunately, Julius Caesar and his descendants won that civil war. Had it not been the case, the way it worked in ancient Rome, Herod Antipater would, of course, been everyone who supported the loser was going to be killed. But Rome itself, of course, well, no, we already did that. Okay. You guys get the idea of how Herod the Great ended up in power, and not hardly of the house of David, because it was Herod's get into power in Israel through the gratitude of Julius Caesar, and they have their religious freedom. Okay, now Herod the Great, his son, when he was young, he had become Galilee's governor. He was only about 15, and Herod the Great was a very ambitious, and he was a aggressive man. He won the respect of Syria's governor by eliminating outlaw bands that had harassed and robbed Syrians living in the district. He was able to capture and execute many of the leaders of those bands. And the Syrians were grateful for Herod the Great for helping them bring peace into Syria, up into Syria as well, which is now under the control of the Roman Empire as well. Antioch was the headquarters of Rome in that territory. It was not Jerusalem. A lot of people think that the headquarters of the Roman Empire was in Jerusalem. No, it was in Antioch. Okay. Well, as his 10-year-old son is growing up, this Herod the Great, well, Antipater's power in Judea alarmed some who considered Antipater and his sons dangerous and cruel tyrants. They were certainly men of their age, and they tended to, while they were grateful for the peace and safety, he had a tendency to Herod Antipater had a tendency to disregard Jewish laws. And so it really alarmed some of the Jews. And who gave you the title of king over us? And they also reminded him that Jewish law prohibited anyone from imposing the death penalty without a decision of Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. And Herod completely ignored that. They're not allowed to give the death penalty. Only the Romans can do that. Actually, the Jews aren't allowed to give the death penalty to anyone either. They, of course, do. They ignore that. And before we're going to the Roman leaders to do it, you need the Sanhedrin, Jerusalem. Well, Herod Antipater ignored that. And others protested, and they summoned Herod to Jerusalem, Herod Antipater, and he comes in dressed in a purple robe and accompanied by guards and the governor of Syria. Well, they're taken back too. This man is in charge. Well, he intimidated the Sanhedrin. And, okay. One Jew remarked, "I've never witnessed such arrogance. When men are summoned to appear before the Sanhedrin," yeah, this is how much Herod Antipater blew him off. "Before the Sanhedrin on charges of murder, they're usually submissive and fearful. But Herod has come dressed like a king and with an armed consort. He dares us to condemn him. However, my complaint is not so much against Herod as it is against you. Listen carefully, O God is great. If you acquit Herod of these charges, he will one day take vengeance on you." And the high priest and others. Okay. So.
Okay, let me show you. I'm taking a class, but that's okay.
Do that again.
I think we've got somebody who needs to mute themselves here. I'll see if I can do it on my end. Go ahead, Father.
All right. Well, let's see. All right. Well, when Caesar, okay, well, let's see what happens. The high priest, Hyrcanus, realizes the high court intended to impose the death penalty on Herod. Well, he dismissed the Sanhedrin and advised him to leave Jerusalem. So Herod returns to Damascus, but not for long. He's going to get his revenge upon them, bribed the Syrian governor for the position of general of the army, and returned intent on attacking. Antipater and his general persuaded them not to assault the city, saying he couldn't be certain of victory, and reminded him that Hyrcanus was a Herodian, one of his supporters. So Herod called off the attack that he had terrified the Jews with this massive show of threat. Okay, so Herod Antipater, during his reign, he was dismissive of the Jews, and he was a man who relied on the power of the Roman sword a very great deal. That's the whole point here. That turned off a lot of Jews. Okay. Well, Caesar was in Rome, and he's preparing for a campaign once again in Egypt at this time. Well, Hyrcanus, the Herodian high priest, sends a delegation to renew the pact of friendship between the Jews and the Romans. Caesar made a brass pillar and engraved on it his decree that granted Rome citizenship to the Jews in Alexandria, confirmed Hyrcanus and his sons as perpetual high priest and priests, permitted the Jews to keep part of their tribute, and allowed them to worship according to their decrees. The decree read in part, I will that Hyrcanus, the son of Alexander, and his children be ethnarchs of the Jews, therefore, according to the custom of their forefathers, and that he and his sons be our confederates. Permit these Jews to gather themselves together according to the customs and laws of the forefathers, and to persist therein. Okay. And the Jews were also granted control of Jerusalem and the permission to strengthen its walls. Okay, well, so Herod Antipater sends his son Hyrcanus, high priest, to Rome. We're going to have to solve something here. Jews don't seem to really want to take our power, accept our power. Caesar is brilliant. This is how we'll solve the whole thing. We'll give the Jews freedom of religion. Yeah. And that's why that decision was made. It's in gratitude for Herod Antipater's thanks, but Herod Antipater wasn't being terribly accepted by the Jewish people, and he wasn't particularly a good Jew himself. Okay. So Jews have Jerusalem, and you have that freedom of worship. Okay. Herod Antipater is really benefiting from all the instability that is going on in both the falling republic and in Israel. Many Jews were, well, indeed, many Jews became victims of that as well. When we think of the fall of the republic and rise of the empire, we don't think of it as having all that much effect in Israel, but it did. Well, conflicts keep going, and Rome decides to intervene again. But the situation, of course, changes a great deal with the death of Julius Caesar and Augustus come into power. And Herod goes, well, thinking that Antipater dies, and thinking that Antipater's death would preserve the rule of Hyrcanus, another zealous Jew paid a servant to poison him at a dinner. Both Herod and Vasco suspected Malchus had murdered their father, though he denied any involvement in the death of Herod Antipater. And, well, when Herod the Great reported to Cassius that his father had been murdered and that Malchus was responsible, Cassius, who's one of the Roman leaders there, gave permission for Herod to avenge his father's death. And he uses a similar treachery. So now Antipater died. You still have conflict going on. Antipater dies. He was probably assassinated. And then Herod the Great assassins kill this man, Malchus. Okay. Julius Caesar's death leaves this huge power vacuum in Rome. And in Rome, that Marcus Antony hoped to fulfill, but he faced the opposition of Cassius, one of Caesar's assassins, and the army's general in the east. So you have Cassius and Mark Antony. And, well, Cassius withdraws his legions from Syria for the fights. And Antigonus, the son of Aristobulus, the last of these Hasmoneans, recruited an army and attempted to invade Judea. Herod the Great engaged his forces as soon as they crossed the border and drove them out. When Herod returned to Jerusalem, Hyrcanus and the people honored him for his victory. Hyrcanus even agreed to let his granddaughter become Herod's second wife. Because Antony's troops' strength had depleted in the war he fought against Cassius, he withdrew to Syria to rebuild his army. Tyre, a group of Jews, complained to him about Herod's rule. Hyrcanus asked, defended Herod, who, with Vashal, gave Anthony a large sum of money, a bribe, to prove more persuasive than the Jews. Okay. So now we got bribes to these fighting Romans. Anthony reconfirmed Herod the Great and the general Paschalis tetrarchs. Okay, and allowed Hyrcanus to remain as high priest. Okay, so what's going on here? This is confusing. What's going on? Okay, what's going on here? Well, the Jews, or a Jew named Malchus, finally decides Herod Antipater has to go. Finds a way to poison him. Now you've got problems. Now no one's running Israel. Herod the Great takes up arms and working with some of these Roman authorities and with some bribes, Herod the Great manages to find himself in a bit of power. Not the king yet, but he has found himself in a bit of power. Well, Mark Antony becomes, while Herod the Great is working his way up after avenging those who killed his father, he's working his way up. And he has the support of the local Roman authorities there. Well, Mark Antony comes under the spell of Cleopatra, and well, he was preoccupied with her in Alexandria. The Parthians invade Syria. This is why Romans want stability in Israel, because the Parthians, the Persians that I've been talking about, well, yeah, I'm going to got a chance here, weakness, I'm going to invade. Well, Antigonus makes an alliance with the invaders, promising them money and women if they would kill Herod and strip Hyrcanus of power. Okay, now we have Jews trying to get Herod the Great killed. And he's working with the people invading Syria, the Persians. Well, Antigonus, with the help of the Parthians, well, they make their way into Jerusalem. But they cannot defeat Herod the Great, even after a lengthy battle. Herod the Great was also a great military commander. And the Parthian general comes to Jerusalem and proposes a meeting. Well, Hyrcanus meets with the Parthians, and a suspicious Herod the Great, I'm not going to attend this. And he was right not to attend that. After entertaining his general Fassel and Hyrcanus, well, Parthian seized them. Okay. Herod was informed they'd been taken captive, that the Parthians intended to kill them. He fled to Jerusalem with his families, his servants, small units of soldiers, planned to take refuge in this large fortress called Masada. But the size of his people joining him, he decided he was going to kick the Parthians out. So what Herod the Great is doing here is beginning to make him pretty popular with the Jewish people. He is, well, on the one hand, he is bringing peace to Jerusalem. Herod Antipater did. But now you've got Herod Antipater. Now he was killed. He wasn't very, didn't have the best opinion of the Jews, even though he was forced to be one. And Herod the Great comes along, and you have this invasion by the Parthians. And Herod the Great stands up, and he gets some supporters. These Parthians are coming into Israel, and he kicks them out. This is going to make Herod the Great popular in Rome as well. Not just with the Jewish people, but popular in Rome as well. Well, Paschal and Hyrcanus, the general and the high priest, well, things don't go too well for them. The Jewish law prohibits anyone physically deformed from serving as high priest. So the Syrian king, ruler up there, had Hyrcanus's ears cut off, so he could no longer be high priest. The general, meanwhile, considered death at enemy hands dishonorable, and because his hands were tied, he kills himself by bashing his head on a rock. And okay, now you have this going on, and Herod sees this going on up there. Okay, Herod appeals to the king of Arabia for help, offering money and Bashir's 7-year-old son as a hostage. King refused because he was afraid of the Persians, the Parthians, who threatened retaliation on anyone who helped them. Okay. So Herod the Great decides his best chance of survival is in Rome. I need Roman legions. I need help. The thing the Romans, don't want to happen is happening. Persians are coming. So he escapes to Egypt, and which was a very, very dangerous trip, but he made it. And he makes it to Rome, Herod the Great. There's no solution to this. Okay, we Herods have been given the throne for all practical purposes. The Jewish people rejected the first one. Now the Parthians are, well, they started out by invading Syria, but now the Parthians and the Syrians are working together. What do you think is going to happen? Okay. He told Mark, when he gets to Rome, he tells Mark Antony how he had barely escaped from the Parthians who had invaded Judea, killed his brother, captured Hyrcanus, and instilled this Syrian Antigonus as king, which is not what the Romans said was king of Israel. He just went out and did it himself. And he said Antony was his only hope, and he risked everything to come to Mark Antony. Antony was sympathetic. He considered Herod a loyal ally of Rome. Yeah, they were. And he hated Antigonus. I don't go invading don't go invading. One province doesn't go invading another province and then tell them who's king. That doesn't happen. And he also believed that Antigonus was an enemy of Rome, having declared an enemy of Rome, which was a death sentence. And Octavian Caesar, the man who would soon be Augustus Caesar, after he wins the fight between himself and Mark Antony. Before that, he was called Octavian Caesar. Well, Antipater had helped him in Egypt as well. So Mark Antony calls the Senate together, informed them of this Parthian invasion of Judea, and that you had this unapproved installation of Antigonus as king. Senate declared Antigonus to be Rome's enemy and surprised Herod. He didn't know, he wasn't asking for this. Herod was just going, I need legions. I need Roman legions. We've got Parthians coming in. Well, the Senate convened, and Antony and Octavian, escorted him out of the Senate with the title King of the Jews. Herod is now in power. And we got one, maybe two more classes, and it will be on Herod the Great and his descendants. We all following that? It's a bit hard. The summaries are easier to follow than what's going on in the book. It's a lot of names. And teaching the class in a classroom, I'd focus more on the names. But the reason Herod Antipater came into power is he rescued Julius Caesar's army, set him up with tremendous power in Israel, basically made him king. They called him an ethnarch, the head ethnarch. Jewish people revolted against him. He was assassinated. And then the Parthians took an opportunity. You've got this weakness going on. Parthians are the Persian kingdoms, what are called down. They invade. Herod the Great steps up and starts pushing them back. And there's so much going on, and Antigonus is coming after Herod the Great. Herod the Great gets out of there and goes to Rome, son of Herod Antipater. Guys, this is a Roman province. You have Parthians who at first tried to take over Syria. Now Syria and the Parthians are together and they're coming down here. This is your eastern border. I need help. It's asking for a lot of Roman legions. He got, and he left with the title of king. Ta-da!
Father, you're not going to
ancient
quiz
world
us.
is pretty wild, don't you
Yeah,
think? Everybody's fighting everybody else. Everybody wants the throne.
There's not going to be a test at the end of this whole thing, right? You're not going to.
Oh, yes. It's 150 multiple choice questions and a 5-page essay, and I will be watching to make sure no one's cheating.
Well,
It's
I'll
all in the
definitely be
book.
cheating
It's in the
or
book.
failing.
I'm going through the book, and well, it's a lot of history, and he isn't the greatest writer. And you're going through this book, you get lost. What Herod is he talking about now? And
yeah, that's
it's
a few more names would have been helpful. A few different names there. There are a lot of Herods there. But
yeah.
Thank you so much.
One of the things I'm going to do is you can see the outline. We're going to go from Herod the Great, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about who are all these other Herods. And I gave you the scripture references, the other Herods that are in charge, down to the Roman invasion and destruction of the temple. So we're going to talk about Herod the Great, and the problems he had. Because you can see from all of this, you got the Sadducees hating the Pharisees. That's not going away. You got Jews don't want this Roman occupation. We fought long and hard to have our own land, and we blew it because we couldn't govern it ourselves. So now we have, now we're a Roman province. And now we have this king who was a great king in some ways. He's, look at Herod the Great in the Bible. You would never, Herod the Great, what? Well, this Herod, son of Herod Antipater, he was a remarkable man. And boy, he was a remarkable man in an impossible situation and lost his mind. We'll get to him next. So we got one, maybe two classes.
So here's what I did for those of you who are left. I did cancel next week's class. That happened to be the last class we had in the schedule because we were thinking it would be about 8 weeks. So I went ahead and sent out a new invitation that starts the first week of December. I went ahead and did 3 of them, Father. We can always cancel it if we need to. But okay. I went ahead and put it on everyone's schedule for 3 weeks. So you'll have to accept that new invitation because this class was ending next week.
I'm sure I can get this done in 2 more classes, but go ahead and keep the 3rd.
Okay, name that tune.
And we do not have a class on the 26th.
That's correct. That's what I was saying. So next week is canceled, and you guys all have a new invitation sitting in your inbox that starts in first part of December and is 3 weeks long. So that's the new invitation. You'll all need to accept that in order to join it. I sent it out to everybody who signed up for the class originally. So that's what's happened. Father, thank you so much.
General idea of where the heritage came from. Okay. And get yourself a good thick book. Study it in detail. But I hope that, yeah, hopefully this is going to help you when you're reading the scriptures and the gospels. You'll have a better understanding of the who, what, where, when, and why. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you, Father. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
bye.